course, all of us have been affected by the disaster, whether we had water or landslides in our house or not, whether we were directly affected or indirectly affected. It's just hard to ignore what has happened to us. And frankly, it's been all the more difficult that it has happened, after 2 years of COVID, when we're already kind of left exhausted, and frankly, we hadn't really recovered fully from the bushfires that hit us already 2 years ago. So there's been 2 big, really years, and having you here in the room, keen to talk about resilience and how we look forward is an extraordinary testament to who we are. So thanks for coming tonight. We really appreciate. A couple of figures which I heard from the Insurance Council of Australia, which also put the scale of disaster in perspective. So probably, as you know, there are more than 1,600 people still in temporary accommodation across the Northern Rivers as we speak. And of course, winters has started. So let's have a thought for those who are really, really having it tough at the moment. When it comes to insurances, and I'm sure we'll be talking about that tonight too, more than 216,000 claims across southeast Queensland and Northern Rivers of New South Wales have been made and counting. That's already $4.3 billion in claims. I personally can't make sense of that figure. I'm impressed, but it goes over my head really. In saying this, figures that really speaks to me, the 4,000 houses that have been rendered uninhabitable because of the floods. This is catastrophic. This is really hard to fathom. And just plain unacceptable, knowing there's so much we can do, and that's why we're talking today, is to prevent this from happening again. Also, another worrying factor is that 70% plus of these residents were underinsured. So not only they had it hard, but they have it even harder because the recovery will be long indeed. So again, good reason for us to talk tonight. And dare I say, we're not starting from scratch. Whether Mullen Care, Zero Emissions Barn, Resilient Barn, we've been talking about building the resilience of our communities for some time now, well before the bushfires. And we could see, such large-scale compounding disaster happening to our communities. We tried as much as we could, prepare our communities and prepare individuals' rise in the streets and neighborhoods and families to support each other. And this is what we have done. The generosity of our communities has been astounding because there has been so much support from tradies who generously helped people renovate, rebuild their home in the aftermath of the flood. So thank you, big thank you. Now I'd like to hand over to James. So James, the founder of JDA Architect. He's a legend in the field of building, resilient houses. He's been doing this for a decade. We have a lot to learn, and I think the best to introduce himself will be himself. But I'm very pleased to have him stop in Mullen tonight. He was in Lismore a few days ago, Kingsleaf this morning. He's asked all over the place. It's an honor to have you tonight, James. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity to come and talk to you, and thanks for Sasha for just relentlessly tracking me down. And no, you've got somebody really special there in the community, and you need people like that because, from my experience, these sorts of things don't happen without champions like Sasha over there. One thing I do want to sort of just say is that we are looking and staring down the barrel of a lot more of these events, and so the aim of the work that I've been doing since 2011 in Brisbane is, I think it was in recognition that everybody's trying their best. It's just and that includes government, that includes insurance agents. Nobody likes to see what happens in these situations. So the critical thing though is to know what to do in the situation, and so that's what we've been working on is 10 years of testing and thinking, and builders and traders have been critical to that, and I totally understand if you just don't trust me as an architect, it's fine, but all I'll try and do is share a little bit of what we've been doing and how we've been doing it, and then open it up to the floor, because I really just want to engage with you rather than just talk at you. And So yeah, I think my practice I set up at the end of 2009 with a specific aim to do Aboriginal housing, and that was kind of the first start of where we began. Did a lot of that for a long time until I realised I was probably more part of the problem than I was the solution. Did a lot of overseas aid work, and then again I realised I was probably more part of the problem rather than the solution. And a lot of that came down to a lack of cultural understanding on my part and understanding of context. So I then thought, my sister lost her home in Kinglake in the bushfires in 2009. I helped out there and realised actually I'm kind of better placed working in my own backyard where I do understand some things and can put some things in place, and then over time incrementally just get better and better and better at what I would like to do as a purpose in life. So one of the kind of things that that happened immediately after the 2011 floods in Brisbane was I got together with the Institute of Architects and organised 60 architects and 100 students of architecture to go around and do pro bono assessments for uninsured homeowners in Goodna and Ipswich in Brisbane. And we had no idea what we were really doing, but the intent was to try and learn how to do things in a different way. So that was kind of like the most amazing mind hive I've ever experienced, having literally teams of 3 people going out and doing, you know, weekend assessments and talking to people who would never normally talk to architects. And I can't sort of thank the local government or any of them for being involved in any of that, because they were non-existent, which is probably something that I've heard many times. But that's kind of what happens in these complex situations. Community comes to the fore. So the Tzu Chi Foundation are a Buddhist organisation from Taiwan. They actually provided me with the names and the addresses for people who needed help, because they were actually going out and door knocking and giving blankets to people. And so then when they heard about me, they started ringing up and saying, hey, could you come and help these people, and could you give these people some advice? And so we would just go there, and then out of that started learning a lot about what did and didn't work in these events. Started sort of putting that into practice a little bit in my own sort of practice, and talking to more and more to builders about, well, how do we do this in a more affordable way? That's a critical thing. Like, I don't want to just ever be an architect that, you know, all we do is, you know, huge projects for wealthy people and that's it, and that's all you can afford, so you can't really afford us, so then therefore you don't get our knowledge. So I'm very much against that. The work I did through that turned into a Churchill Fellowship. I managed to trick them into giving me money, and got to go to New Orleans and the Netherlands and the UK, and again I learned a lot about the value of the strength of community, because it's easy to put resources towards recovery. It's really hard to put resources towards something that you don't know is going to happen at certain points. And so I get it. And but the aim would be for, say, the Mullum community to just to bounce back as quickly as possible. And you were talking before about bouncing forward, and I like that idea a lot. How to do things in Mullum and elsewhere. I've been in Lismore, and same conversation, but in the region, like it feels like it's just going to keep happening here. Like, it's happened so often recently, and I can't. Similar to Brisbane, where, you know, post 2011, the conversation was all about the dam operators, and, you know, it was all, everybody was pointing the finger at the dam operators, which, in a way, displaced that individual responsibility of, well, it wasn't. It'll never happen again because it was their fault, kind of thing. But so that means I can just go and put my plasterboard back in my house and it's not going to happen again. Whereas the conversation's totally turned this time round. And, you know, 2 major flood events in 10 years, and in between we've had multiple events. And the program that I've been working on with Brisbane City Council, we've done 300 assessments, we've built almost 200 projects. Came through the recent event really, really well, like 99%. On the live stream, I think Johannes is going to put a video that I brought in, and it shows one of our projects going through a flood.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay.
And that was Rusty, who, like, I never ever thought being an architect you'd be called a lifesaver. Like, it was. But this guy has been through flooding so often. He's in his 70s, and he literally said to me, "If I'd have had to go on through this again, I'd just be done." Like, I don't. He doesn't. He didn't think he would. He was at the end of his tether. We just happened to come in and do the work. Council provides 50 grand out of the citywide flooding budget. The drainage budget, because they recognise that in certain areas of town they're not going to be able to put pipes big enough in the ground to take the flooding. So it's better to make the homes resilient. And so that's sort of where we come from and what we've been doing for a long time. To be eligible for that program, you have to essentially flood once in every 2 years. And so we've got 1,000 properties to do. The state government's now released a lot of money, and I'm involved in the design of the program to buy back, raise or retrofit homes, and that's something like $740 million. And we've been developing and designing the guideline around that, and then next week we'll be beginning to roll the program out. But the good thing about that is that it's flexible enough to be able to say, okay, well, what kind of flooding is in this particular area? And for example, in Mullum, I understand just through talking to friends, I have no specific knowledge about Mullum, I don't want to act like I do, but it seems like as compared to, say, Lismore, it's a much sort of broader floodplain, and therefore potentially you might benefit more out of raising homes than, say, elsewhere where there's a lot of topography and flood levels can kind of, you never really know what you're going to get a lot of the time, you know. We're seeing that in Brisbane where houses are 8 metres out of the ground and still they can flood sometimes. So it's not a one-size-fits-all silver bullet. It's the good thing to do is to understand flood risk and flood context, and then from there to kind of put that into action. So
perhaps like something which has really helped me understand, you know, when you think of, you know, preparing a house to become flood resilient, something that really has helped me is the 3 principles: wet proofing, dry proofing, earth elevation. Can you please tell us a bit more about that before we get more into the details?
Yeah, so obviously elevation's obvious. When I was in New Orleans, I met I can't remember his name now, but he had an awesome head of hair. And you know, I really liked his hair. I wished I'd had his hair. But he was elected. Interestingly, in Mississippi, they actually have water boards, and they're elected, but they're not political officials. Their income comes from tax, but they are the guys that are, and the women who are tasked with looking after the community in terms of a flood risk sort of mitigation system. So they'll do things like levee building and other flood works. He said to me, "Oh, you know, James, your elevation is the salvation from inundation," and I used to kinda, but not where we come from, kind of thing. Sometimes it's too difficult. So obviously, elevation is just. What's interesting with elevation and what's really super critical there is you might have a defined flood event level, which is, you know, in the planning scheme where if you want to raise your home, the council says you've got to be 500 millimetres or 300 millimetres above a particular level. Now, I've done works every single year in Brisbane where that level has been raised higher and higher. So the problem that I have with it, again, maybe here it's different, because you've got a broader floodplain and there's a minimal difference between, say, we no longer talk 1 in 100 years, we talk 1%. So the 1% annual probability of it occurring is a particular level. Now, I would be also looking at what's projected for that particular community and then going well and truly above that if I was to be raising anything. But dry proofing...
Sorry, just before going to dry proofing, so when you say elevation, you speak of elevating the house, but not only, right? You also speak of elevating the services.
Yeah, that's right. If the house is already an elevated home, that's part of the sort of the flood resilience, I suppose. We do separate circuits up and down. Now that you can read your meter from the road with smart meters and things like that, we've been able to put meter boards well and truly above a flood line, even though the majority of the house is below that. And what that enables people to do is, in the event of a flood, the biggest issue, and I'm sure hopefully there's some electricians in the audience, but from what we've seen, if we can keep the meter boards out of the floodwaters, then even if the rest of the house goes under, it's not a hugely onerous task to just rip the GPOs off and replace them. If you can also get the GPOs out of the flood line as well, then that's an even better, more of a beneficial situation, because we've had it where, you know, some of the houses we've done, they've had the power back on. As long as the power's on in the community, they'll have the power back on within an hour. And so, yeah, it's a separate circuits. You can switch off downstairs, hopefully, and just keep running upstairs if the power hasn't gone off. So it's a complex thing. And again, overland flow is very easy to deal with, in and out in 6 to 8 hours, potentially sometimes in certain situations. You don't need to adjust all the materials. Some materials work, you know, generally most materials work well in that situation, other than plasterboard. I keep that and come back to that. And then creek flooding, maybe you're getting slightly higher levels, and that might stick around for a little bit longer, say overnight potentially. Who knows? Again, it depends on where you live. Riverine, again, is the same thing. It might stay around for 4 or 5 days like we get in Brisbane.
So now we are getting to basically wet proofing. Can you tell us more about wet proofing before talking about dry proofing then?
Well, I'll do dry proofing because I hate it. And I want to get it out of the way. Do not believe in dry proofing. We've done it. I got pushed into doing it in Brisbane. And if Tom was here, he's currently got a claim of $465,000 against him by somebody in Brisbane who pushed us politically to do the work, and we didn't want to do the work. We brought the stuff in from the UK, it failed, we knew it was going to fail. It's just to go through the pain of literally saying, this is not a good idea, and then be sort of pushed into it. So I'm not a big believer in trying to keep the water out. I think it's much, in a way, maybe that also plays into the whole complacency factor. Oh, my house is going to be fine. It's okay, but remember, you've still got windowsills and things like that, and so they'll only work up to a certain level. And it's what goes on in the UK a lot, because they've got masonry and stone and those kinds of buildings, and you've got no other choice. You can't sort of, you know, do what we can do with our homes. So.
What about a levy, like a personal levy? Like if you live rurally, for instance, would that be an acceptable dry proofing option?
We've had troubles in the Lockyer Valley in Brisbane with people doing that, and then if they're not designed well enough, they'll actually exacerbate flooding because they fail, and then once a levy fails, you then get heaps more water rolling down a hill towards your neighbour. You can also then be, if you're not smart about it, you can be diverting floodwaters to your neighbouring property as well. So the best way to do that is to do it as an overall plan, if you're going to do it. So it's not farm by farm or house by house, or it's actually, well, let's look at the whole catchment that we're trying to deal with here and be smart about it. Let's not be dumb. And that's the problem that I've seen a lot, is just people taking an individual approach and not thinking about others. And then I remember after, you know, some stories like a personal little levy of 1 metre high fails on a farming property, and all the topsoil from that property gets taken onto the neighbouring property, and Mr. Farmer rocks up with his tractor to get his topsoil back, and his neighbour's there with the gun saying, "You're not taking anything," you know, like this is mine now. And there's lots of stories like that. So I caution against thinking about big infrastructure moves. I think it's better to just accept and understand flood risk and bounce back as quickly as possible. So
okay, yep. So now let's go into wet proofing, and then we'll open the floor for your questions, comments, yep. Perhaps sharing your experiences, see what challenges you have.
So wet proofing is obviously the opposite to dry proofing, where you let the water through and accept and understand. And I found that because it involves a certain amount of education on the homeowner's part. They have to understand their flood risk, and by doing that, they then accept a certain by understanding, they then accept a certain level of risk. We do floor level surveys, and then we've pinned that to the flood level, and then we look at the projections, and then we have a conversation about that. But the idea is open the front door, open the back door, let the water through, design it in a way that you've got, sills that are set down to make it easy cleaning. Even if I'm not a massive fan of, I like solid sills. I don't like sort of tracked sills where you can get a lot of mud and nasties collecting and things like that. So the idea is essentially just utilising materials that, there's nothing wrong with, say, lifting up these carpet tiles and just polishing that concrete slab, or, hardwood works generally very well. Pine is terrible. Pine will lead to a lot of long-term mould issues we've seen. If we have to retrofit a pine-framed home, like a brick veneer, we will actually prime the frame before we put any lining back on. And the lining we do put on will be something that the homeowner is happy with, whether that's like a V-line or a fibre cement with a particular pattern to it, or tile up the wall to a certain level. Again, it's not complex. It's just probably involves a fair bit of waterproofing between, say, floor and wall materials a lot of the time. We don't try and keep water out of the envelope of the building as such. We don't, because the fear initially, we were trying to do that, but we realised actually if we did too good a job and we did keep the water out, if the water did get in, then it wouldn't be able to get out of the cavity. So we will work hard at, say, drilling holes through the bottom plate if it's an elevated home, or just slightly off the ground. We'll drill holes in the bottom plate from underneath to allow the water to drain out. We'll put vents, depending on the material, to allow water to drain and then dry the cavity quicker. Typically we find, like, we work a lot with moisture meters. We find that pine framing will still be, average moisture content should be around 10% generally, but we'll find that up to 4-6 weeks after an event, still be 20 to 30% depending on the kind of construction, whereas hardwood will be back down to, say, 14%. And hardwood, yes, it will swell, but it will also contract back into its original form better than pine. So that's the sort of principle, and we've had a lot of success with cabinetry. One of these products is actually a lot more expensive than the other, but the more expensive one stands the test of time through all forms of flooding. The Stylex one, which is the cheaper one here, will be fine, but if it's going to sit in water for days in a riverine event, we've found that it's not as good as the Tricoya. I've used the Tricoya a lot. We do like to 2-pack cabinetry, just to give that extra layer of protection. So sooner or later, there's going to be a lot of case studies coming out of the work that we've done.
Hi, thanks for those ideas. What do you do about the insulation in the walls, though?
So for a habitable construction, we have to kind of abide, the Section J of the BCA. We've got to make sure we've got thermal insulation in the walls. So what we're using there is an XPS product from Bunnings. I think it's just an extruded foam. It's like a board. It's about 25 mil thick. What we did was we'll do a resilient lining on the inside, and then generally a hardwood frame. I know it's a bit more expensive to do that, but it lasts. Between the studs, we'll actually cut the board to the 450 or 400 mils, whatever it is, and place that between the studs. So it means that the cavity we end up with is essentially 25 mil. And then what we'll then do is either do an FC lining with a vertical groove in it, like a shiplap or whatever, or a timber shiplap profile. If you look at my website, there's a bit of stuff on there. and we'll push that back in. So you actually do see the exposed frame on the outside. It's almost like an old Queenslander single skin. So we're trying our best to reduce the amount of cavity, but then fill it with something that's not going to soak up any water. And then what we then do is seal around it from the outside as well. So we've been going back into the projects that we've done like that, and because council are keen to know and learn, so we've been pulling the material off to see what's going on the inside, and there's been nothing getting through. So they see that that's a successful way of treating a stud-framed, almost a single skin, but getting the thermal insulation. It's hard retrofitting an existing home. So I will play the game of, if it's a non-habitable room, like a bathroom, or a laundry, or whatever falls under non-habitable under the BCA, then the National Construction Code, sort of not trying to have a cavity at all, but then you don't have any insulation. So it's a bit, but you still can tile then and things like that. So, yeah.
Like when you're fixing up houses around here that you can't do that method you were talking about. So how do you go into someone's house and they still have to meet the thermal requirements of basics and so on? And
yeah,
and you've got.
I'd be using the extruded foam again.
Yeah.
Just filling it full of stuff, and then trying to reduce the cavity as much as possible. We have actually removed the cavity in certain instances, like we've actually cut at that line and pushed the timber back directly onto the bricks. It's a bit of mucking around, but the other options are, depending on the level, we will, as I mentioned earlier, we'll prime that frame with a mould kind of paint, and then some people have accepted screwing materials on and off after an event, like running a dado line around at a certain point, and actually others don't like that idea because they're not in the position of being handy like that. So we will essentially seal the inside layer as much as possible, and sometimes actually we'll bring in an FC onto the frame. We'll prime the frame, put the FC onto the frame, and then we'll even do another layer. We'll waterproof that, and then do another layer over the top of that to try our best to keep it out of there. We'll add more weep holes on the outside to drain the water out and things like that. So the intent is do your best to keep it sealed perfectly on the inside and not let it get into the frame on the inside. But if it does get into the frame from the outside, which through weep holes in bricks, etc., it will, then at least you can get the water out as quickly as possible. So the brick veneer type house in a floodplain is a problem, and it should never have existed, but it's cheap. It's a cheap form of housing from the 70s and 80s and came up from down south and makes a lot of sense. But it doesn't make a lot of sense to me to keep going with that style. To me, a lot of sense is an elevated timber framed house that you can mess around with, and not a slab on ground home in a floodplain. Like we're struggling in Brisbane. The brick veneer homes are the ones we're going to be buying back because there's nothing we can do. You can't raise those. So a lot of them are cheap homes and with vulnerable people in them. And I don't like retrofitting brick veneer, but we have done it.
Thanks for coming in. Quick question on your installation of the walls. Would it be a possibility to, say in the Mullum area where we only had certain amounts through the house, to split it at a level, have reinforcement coming down in the form of a steel post, and just do the base level in a hardwood, so that you've still got all your support structure in there, you've put the hardwood in the bottom, and then do the US style of how they insulate and spray it in, wipe it out, paint it, and then cover it, and then it's not going to go anywhere. Would that be a viable option? Yeah.
If what I'm imagining you're saying, that's not a bad idea either. Yeah.
Because the other idea that we've heard floating around is to actually cut it and just put a solid brick underneath it, and then connect back
You
down
could
with
do
a
that.
tie rod.
You could do that too.
Yeah.
Maybe you could put the bricks in around the rods
Yeah.
as well.
And the last one was...
And then maybe even render it. You could like maybe waterproof and render that
Yeah.
face perhaps.
Yep.
Yep.
And the last one was that we had half a metre through our house.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got a brick veneer, we've got the worst kind of scenario going. So
Yep.
what we've kind of thought about was, if we're in a truss, if we've got a truss system,
Yep.
and we prop it and jack, and because this is only going to be working in a scenario of a complete strip out. So
Yep.
you do the disconnect, you jack the roof up,
Yep.
and actually put a reverse beam in
Yep.
that sits on slab.
Yep.
And you only build a hob on the top of 90 mil, so when you lift the roof up, reinstate your outer wall,
Mm-hmm.
and then you can just fill it and put your slab and all your new systems back in underneath.
Yeah.
But it only would work in a full strip out, because the cost effectiveness of stripping everything out and doing the disconnect is going to outweigh anything else.
Have you you got a single story? Have you?
We're about to try this on
Yeah.
our house.
I had this idea, and you can tell me if it's rubbish, but I had thought about, I think what I'm understanding you saying,
Yep.
where why not lift the roof off a brick veneer house, elevate to a second level, and then just build on
New
a
flooring.
Exactly, and
Yeah.
then but leave downstairs as storage and washing. Like you can wash that stuff out. It used to be the old house. It's still got the bricks. Rip the pine out and all that stuff. But because it's non-habitable, you don't have to be worrying about. And I did talk to an engineer slightly about the idea, and he did think that if the slab was actually strong enough, you could probably get away with utilising the existing footings to take, say, a timber frame upper floor.
Yeah. Well, back in the 80s,
So-
the standard footing was, and the old man built the house, was a 450.
450. See, that's like even
You know,
better
so
than
it'll
what you
take-
see today.
Yeah, and it'll take
Yeah.
that all day long. But
Exactly.
because in a monetary setup, that the base to lift the slab out of the flood zone, because we'll take 400 above the flood zone
Yeah.
and lift the roof, is a costly process.
Yep.
But what would be more costly is to build a second floor on. So
Yep.
we're currently just going through the numbers now just to
Yep.
see if it's going to work.
Yeah.
But we're going to guinea pig our house and just see what happens.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't mind checking that out.
Well, when we get all the DAs, our problem currently is, and you know, there's good people in Byron Shire Council, but they're hopeless. They're so slow. So to
Do
get
you
all
need a
this
DA
stuff
for that?
through, because you're lifting. Because we're lifting the shed too, to just have a dry spot.
So you need a DA to lift a shed.
Yeah, well, it had ordinarily been through, and we needed a section 96 to just lift one half of an internal section of that slab. So when the records are available from you guys from Brisbane, are we going to have that available to us and a matching to AS standard to what we can do down here?
I hope so.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the idea, right?
Yeah.
But it's sort of like one thing that BCC did do, and all local councils up in 2011, they put these temporary local planning instruments in, which meant that you could go way higher. Like it was a relaxation of the planning issues, so you could lodge a DA and get your result, and you didn't have to pay any money, and it'd be out within a week, and all that stuff. Like they did do some really good things. So it surprises me that you're still sort of having to wade through planning around here.
They're going through processes of actually implementing certifiers to take on other projects so that we can get fast tracked.
Yeah, good.
But still, there's a 9-month wait for stuff. Like it's meant to be 14 to 20 weeks. So that's the other hurdle. Plus, you're talking hardwood, which is a great option, but we currently go through a material shortage.
Totally, yeah.
So that's why I was thinking maybe cut it and just brick it.
Yeah.
Because there's plenty of that stuff. around.
Yeah.
Has there been anything in your experience with a small scale shotcrete and steel, as in going over brick, or to make a new structure and the existing structure becoming like lost form, and then deconstructing after that?
You mean like a pool or like sort of that
like
kind of
small scales, if using small like 50mm mesh and say 75mm worth of high strength sand cement.
Oh yeah.
Because we've done a house down in Goulburn out of an EPS panel called Schnell, and it's a styrene centre with 50mm mesh on each side and truss welded through like a panel. Then you pretty much just starter bar them into the slab.
Yep.
Put them all together and then shotcrete it and build your roof on top of that.
Yep. Yep.
So
We
like
did
retrofitting.
I've done that in a lot of Aboriginal projects up in North Queensland. Yeah, that would work. Yeah, I can't imagine why that might not work. Yeah, absolutely.
Have you got any more info on what you've done up on these Aboriginal builds?
Yeah, there's that was in the community of Arakoon. That wasn't done for flood resilience, as you can imagine. It was done as a hardy home kind of concept.
Yeah, there's a lot of overlap there though with...
Totally.
Yeah.
It is. I mean, wouldn't it be awesome we could get to a point in Australia where no matter what came our way, we didn't have to have all this problem, like, and you know, architects and builders and subbies we can surely sort it out and not have to worry about government to sort it out for us, because like it's a hard job being. Who would want that job? I wouldn't want that job. Everybody's always looking at you, trying to criticise you, and you get to do my head in. So I'm hoping that in the future we don't have to have these sorts of forums, because we're getting smarter at what we do, and just the waste, landfill. I just can't get my head around why we just keep pouring money into the ground. It doesn't make sense. So yeah, sounds like another idea for Sasha's ideas library.
I'm just wondering about how insurance companies come on board with this sort of stuff. Like,
yeah, me too. But there are some really interesting people down the back there who have got a lot more influence than I do in this space, and I'm just seen as the kind of annoying guy that kind of criticises them every now and then. But Johns Lyng they've got a big. So, for example, I've been into homes where they've flooded 5 times before, right? And they've been replaced like for like 5 times. So you imagine being the tradie that does that work and has to go back time and time and time again. So that's why, you know, like, interestingly, all my family are insurance builders in Rockhampton, cousins and uncles, and they do it because they cream it. Like that's the reason they do the insurance work. It's problematic, but it's also very lucrative. But they don't like doing the same stuff again and again and ripping their own work out. And so we've become way closer because they hate architects. But now that I'm into this area and I'm talking practically about doing things better, they're actually starting to talk to me a bit more about their ideas too, which is a good thing. So
Danielle, thanks for coming. What I suggest is you can introduce yourself. Also explain what you said before, why you're here, what you guys are doing here, and perhaps then look into insurance.
Daniel Meiklejohn, I'm an Executive General Manager at the Johns Lyng Group. Johns Lyng Group, bit of a mix and match of what we undertake. We obviously work for insurance companies, reactive repairs and things to buildings. We're a commercial building company, undertaking all sorts of buildings around the country, plus more recently working with state governments across the country in relation to major events in response, and talking about, I guess, where you're coming from, James, is trying to educate not just insurers but governments around resilience. I think we're all used to talking about recovery, but I think there needs to be a seismic shift in the mindset around resilience. Our particular role here at the moment through the Northern Rivers and other parts of New South Wales is we're undertaking a property assessment program for the state government, and part of that is educating them on flood levels, where flood levels have been in properties, overlaying critical data on 1 to 100 and historic flood levels. And also part of what we're doing, which really dovetails into exactly where you're headed, James, and some fantastic information there, is being a bit more practical about how things get rebuilt and what types, and help inform the government about what types of programs they should be implementing, because it's exactly what we do. We do the same thing over and over and over again, and we just end up with the same result. And obviously, that's the definition of an idiot, isn't it? So when they talk about that type of stuff, so there needs to be a seismic shift in taxpayer money being wasted time and time again in relation to just doing the same thing over again. So resilient materials, cutting edge technologies, about some of the ideas we were talking to about James, about houses in floodplains that can actually lift and float with the flood levels and these types of things. It's all very important stuff and so relevant to some of the suggestions and data we're collecting now for the state government. Insurance. Well, that's an education process for us with the insurers. I mean, one of the hot topics around environmental, global warming, and what we call environmental, sustainable, and green practices. There's a number of strategies we're helping to try and help insurance companies around in relation to lowering the carbon footprint. Because ultimately, events keep getting worse and worse and worse. Is there a point where we can try and pare that back somehow? And talking about resilient materials, when we go in to rebuild or rectify a house, is using CFC where we can instead of plasterboard, hardwood timber floors. When we come to wiring a house, IP65 rated, cabling, switchboards, as high as we can from a compliance point of view, is up to 2100 above a floor level. So looking at all these types of strategies to try and make things as we talk flood resistance, but we've got fire resistance, cyclone ratings, so all these different type of events around design practices and helping insurance companies implement different types of policies and how they rebuild. And one sort of tagline we're sort of working with is rebuild with renewables. So part of our business is a renewable energy business and starting to try and educate insurers around rebuilding with renewable energy and renewable materials and things like that.
I'm curious as to why you asked the question. Like, is it because it comes from a challenge that you have with insurance trying to make things better?
Well, it just comes from the fact that it's got to be beneficial to insurance companies to get a resilient house. It's not going to, they're not going to replace with gyprock in the next year and the year after that.
Well, there's a better idea though, and because I've been, I've done work with IAG and Suncorp and I've got a lot of good friends in the insurance sector because they actually are like us on an individual level. We don't like seeing this stuff, right? But if it's this sort of bureaucratic kind of process, etc., the better idea to bring them into line rather than negotiate with them is to mandate through the Australian standards. Because we've got a BAL rating for bushfire, right? So if an insurer is going to build back, they've got to build back to code. So code means mandate X level of service or quality or whatever it is. In the flood space, so we've got cyclone, we've got the Australian cyclone, we've got bushfire. The only thing for flood is all about structural integrity of a building. There's nothing yet that deals with the non-structural elements of the building, which we are working on, and I've had an economist working on the modelling for the last 4 years on all the work we've been doing, and so we've got a really great economic model that's ready to go, because apparently in order to get building code change or reform in the country in an economic model to show cost benefit, because they're afraid of putting something in place that builders will turn around and say, oh, that's going to ruin us, and it's going to be 50 times more expensive to do that bit and that bit and that bit. So we've got a very detailed economic model that's based on actual costs of completed projects. So I used to think we could shift the oil tanker quicker than we are, but I think we could do it through building code reform, and that's my solution. Because I think there's multiple insurers, there's big ones and little ones, and there's banks, and they're not all going to play by the same rule book, but if the rule book is the reform, then that's how they have to play.
Hi, Lisa from Mullum Joinery here. I've seen the pricing for the Tricoya, and I know it's quite expensive, and I've heard you say a few things are quite expensive to build back better.
Yep.
What would you say of all these things on this sheet, and possibly even more, would give you the biggest bang for your buck?
Services. Yeah, get the services fixed up, because once you've got your services working again, then at least you could start helping others. and then perhaps together, like in Lismore a couple of days ago, we were talking about the idea of community-wide purchasing of materials, bulk purchasing of resilience materials to lower the cost. So rather than just going down to the local hardware store and buying X square metres of FC or whatever, but actually, because you're all, you know, living in an area that's known for its collaborative community approaches to things. So that's what we were talking about in Lismore with the business group the other night, was in order to reduce the cost of some of these things, you could bulk purchase. And yes, Tricoya is very expensive, I know that. But we haven't had to rip out any of the kitchens we've done. So it's worth, for people who can afford it, that's the only other thing. But we still did it within a 50 grand budget for the whole houses that we were doing. Like the average retrofit of the houses we've been doing in Brisbane is $38,000. The highest cost was 65 for a particular property, and those owners put more money in on top. They put 15 grand in on top. But I think you do get a 50-year guarantee with it, don't you? I think that's something like that. Anyway.
It's quite extensive. Yeah.
It's only fully warranted if it's painted.
Yes, that's right.
All around.
Yeah.
It's usually like
on all edges. That's right.
And the two-face front and back, so it's all around.
I have to say too, that goes for solid core doors too. If you don't paint all edges of the solid core door, you'll still have trouble. We saw that. Some of the builders didn't. They kind of forgot. And yeah. So what other ones here? This is so good. You've done an amazing job, Sasha. Yeah, I have to say, like, it's nice to go to a street in Brisbane where we've done a lot of work, Torwood Street, and talk to people that have come through the last event and been back in within a matter of days. And on Rusty's house, yeah, like it was very satisfying. I have to be honest with you, we hadn't had it tested in the 10 years up until the recent event, since we started doing the work, right? Really. And the night of, I think it was the Saturday night or the Sunday when we knew it was going to be a big one, I was very nervous. I literally thought I'd sold everyone a stupid idea and I was about to leave town. But then on the Sunday, I started getting texts from a lot of people saying, "Oh my God, it's actually working," and you know, thank you and all that sort of stuff. So it is. I can't say it worked 100% because we did have that door fail and didn't want to do it in the first place. But anyway, but generally all the resilience works worked. Some people laminated over the Stylex, which I wasn't in favour of, but again, the homeowner signed a waiver because that's what they wanted. They wanted the exact look of their old kitchen. If that sat in water for 2 or 3 days, it did get ripples in the laminate. So, but we were waiting for that stuff to dry out, and then apparently it all went back fine.
Yeah, so. Right. So just for the Stylex, it's a product that they are constantly like improving, and so the product that you had on the market at the time you did your job is probably a different version, an earlier version than the version that exists now on the market, and they are also releasing more products like now.
Yeah, that's the good thing. Like
this week or last.
When I first started, marine ply was the only thing, which is why all the work we did was marine ply. And but again, even marine ply, if you don't seal all edges, we'll get some soakage, and so. Yeah, it's just trial and error. But the point is that people are back in quick, and even if things aren't perfect, they can sort of work out things a bit better. So yeah.
Yeah, just with the marine ply, I just thought, oh, it's marine ply. It's got water-resistant glues and the laminates and stuff, it should be fine. And after this flood, I did see some sort of mould starting at the flood line, but it sort of dried out. It didn't deform. It didn't delaminate. So, I mean, is that a success?
It's not floating down the river somewhere, is it? So, exactly. So it depends on the level of, you know, what you're willing to accept, I suppose. We found that, you know, you could definitely see who had sealed the edges better than others. And that was an interesting conversation. One thing I will say about insurance, I've been a little bit disappointed because prior to this event, we had managed to get a couple of the bigger insurers to lower premiums on our work by 50%. So that was very successful. But again, and this is why I don't really blame them, they're factoring in risk from everything, like bushfires and all the rest, and we all carry the risk, right? We all pay. It's a big gamble. We all pay. So even though I live on a hill, my premiums go up after these sorts of events. Sam in my office, he was paying $3,000 prior to this event. He's built resiliently. He got flooded. We cleaned him up. Within a day, he was back in. Minor claim. A month later, his premiums got doubled to $6,000, just overnight. And he's got a resilient build. So we've challenged it, and the response was, well, he got lucky. It could have been worse. Not, you got a resilient build. Oh, we might take that in consideration. It was, so I think it's still unsophisticated, the recognition of this stuff. And so therefore, the more people out there like you guys that keep doing it and pushing it, the more recognition there will need to be, because you'll need to have market share, right? So you might have to be a bit more ahead of the game than somebody else, and I think that'll just drive the change, perhaps. So, yeah.
Just wanted to backtrack on the kitchen cabinet side of things. So if, and it's rudimentary, but we know that Bondcrete seals stuff. Would it be a viable study that you guys could undertake on whether there's a suitable product that will actually soak into Bondcrete during the cabinet making process? So they've routed out all the hinge work and everything, soak it, sand it, and then two-pack it and see if that's something that would actually work for a kit. Because if it's so expensive for the other cupboards, if you're still using marine ply and the glues are holding and you're soaking the ends and it's going to only absorb in a fraction of the way anyway, it's still going to block that water and any class 3 black water or whatever that's
it only needs to hold on for a little bit of time, doesn't it?
Well, we had water in our house for 17 hours.
Yeah.
Some people had 4 days, some people had, 45 minutes.
Yeah.
But on a level of stuff like that, is there a department that you guys actually start testing stuff like this?
When I was in the UK, I actually became friends with a guy called Stephen Garvin, who is like the global dude that does this sort of stuff, right? And I asked him, so how do you do all your testing? And he's like, just stick it in the bath. And I was like, oh, okay. So we just started doing that. Yeah. So I recommend that strategy to you. Like,
it's
why
probably
not?
not something that I'll tackle because there's plenty of other stuff we'll have a look at.
Oh, get the bubble bath going, get the hot water out.
Yeah, get the Epsom salts.
No, but I mean, that's what I'm serious. If you think of a good idea, just give it a go.
No one's going to back it if it's not AS standard or in part of the... So it just gets voided and then it might have been a good idea. Saves a $46,000 kitchen.
Yep.
And all the parts can be done out of marine ply, soaked and then assembled.
Yeah.
So...
I do want to, from a cost point of view, we have a rule of thumb for all the costs associated with the works we're doing, so that way we don't have to kind of look specifically at all the works the builders are, the cost of the build, as long as they're within plus or minus 10% of our benchmark, and we adjust that every year based on all the costs that are coming through. The kitchens, we've got a range of 12 to 18 grand. So if you're seeing a kitchen that's $46,000, I'd be kind of questioning that a little bit.
It's more like if you're looking in the whole scope of the house.
Yeah, yeah.
So they've got cupboards and everything.
Right.
Maybe,
Oh, that makes a bit more sense.
But the kitchen would be out of the product that we know is ultra expensive.
Yeah.
Is where the $46,000 could kick in. So it's more just testing new variations and actually getting the AS behind it.
One thing to look out for with kitchens is whatever under the bench top, we've actually gone back twice in 160 odd times and pulled out the bench top because the cabinet maker has done the sneaky and put chipboard under the bench top. So be careful with that. We specify stainless steel screws as well, which they don't like doing because they break easy and all that sort of stuff. So, but again, they don't rust out. We've had situations where the screws have started, you know, showing. And this is Nick, everyone. Nick's a bit of a legend. He works for Johns Lyng Group. He used to be at the ICA, and as we've been putting together the work in Queensland on the EPW stuff, I've been ground truthing a lot of the stuff with Nick. So give him a call and say, hey, insurers are saying this, what do you reckon with the builders like this? Because we're trying to dovetail in with the insurance works, with the works we're doing with the state. And so Nick's been very helpful, and it's one of those guys that seems committed to doing it better.
Appreciate that, James. Yeah, so I've come across to the Johns Lyng Group, and again, I've known of James for quite a number of years while I've been at the ICA working in disaster recovery. I just wanted to talk about the insurance aspect as well, because it's come up a couple of times. First of all, you know, insurance is expensive, but when you look at the numbers, insurers last year, or for the last 12 months, they brought in, I think it was $41 billion in premiums across Australia, and they paid out $44 billion. So that's generally year on year, the insurers are paying out more in claims than they actually bring in premium. It's what they do with the money in between, where they start to make that profit. But across the industry last year was a $1 billion profit. That's shared across all the insurers. But when you think about how much revenue is coming in and how big the industry is shared across the insurers, it's not huge. Industry needs to be profitable, because if it's not, then insurance doesn't exist. So it's not a bad thing. The insurers need to make money, or else, you know, they won't be around. In Australia, insurance is risk-based priced, which again is a good thing. If you have a low risk, insurance is lower. High risk, your insurance is higher. The reason that is a good thing is it acts as an incentive to lower the risk. The challenge comes where, you know, there was mentions before about how do insurers recognise resilience, and that's a key thing, right? That's important. So if you are lowering the risk, the insurers need to be recognising that. The challenge comes around how do the insurers actually quantify it, because it comes down to maths. They put a price on a risk, and they add all of those prices together, and that's the premium. With a flood levy, it's easier because they can run the data and figure out where the flood level is after that flood levy, and they can start pricing that in. With these types of programs, it's a bit harder. They can't necessarily quantify what the risk reduction is if you put in flood resilient materials. The great thing about what James is doing is that, you know, from 2011 he started this process. Some of those houses have now flooded. Hopefully, you know, over the next 6-12 months, government and James and his team will be able to start pulling together that data to show what their claims cost reduction was with some of these houses. So these houses that were rebuilt after 2011 with flood resilient materials. You know, James, you know, he's shown me photos, he's talked about it tonight. Some of these places, residents were back in within a couple of days, and the actual cost of the repairs, so the damage that did occur in those houses, the cost of repairs is a lot less. So once that data is collected and you're able to compare it to the house next door, which wasn't rebuilt with flood resilient materials, hopefully, you know, insurers will be able to start to quantify some of that risk reduction, and that's where you start to see the work done here. Now, just where you are using flood resilient materials, just keeping evidence of that, keeping evidence of the process that you're using will always help, because at some point in time, there will be a system, I'm sure, built around this that is able to start recognising those resilient components in a house and being able to then quantify what that risk reduction is.
I know they're interested. They've with one of the larger ones, we've been doing a little bit of stuff on the side with helping understand how to automate the recognition of resilience into, you know, when you go online and you sign up for your premium and you type in what your house is, what age and all that, what it's made of. And there will hopefully, what they're working towards is a section that is about resilience, flood resilience or bushfire resilience or whatever it is. So I think there's a definite intent on the part of the larger insurers, because they're a bit more sophisticated, and they've got, you know, more money to throw at ideas like this.
I had a question to the crowd actually, because I assume, you know, if you came tonight, it's because obviously you're interested by these questions. You know, hopefully some of your questions were answered. But also, I'm keen to know what your challenges are. Assuming that you want to know, when you help someone to move back into their home, you want to make it better. What are your challenges? What is difficult for you to do to help them in this process? So we mentioned insurance. What else?
My house is uninhabitable with a 2-year wait until it's fixed. And like, I would knock it down tomorrow if I was allowed to. But I first have to like get paid to do a development application to get the permission to knock down a house that we don't really want to build again.
Yeah.
Because it has already been flooded multiple times. And I think that's maybe one area where Queensland is ahead of New South Wales, that they've had that experience before. And you know, state government here is so far away that maybe we could just move the border down a little bit further south.
Well, yeah, I mean, and then you'd win the state of origin. Been waiting to say that all night. Yeah, I think, yeah, I have to say I have been a bit surprised how slow the wheels have turned down here, given that are you not aware of what's gone on in Queensland for years, like, or even in this area? Like, it's quite surprising, a little bit. I don't want to sort of cast too many aspersions at people, but yeah, it is a bit slow. Yeah. Yeah.
What else you got in question? What are the challenges that you have?
The building height plane and the building height envelope. If you're going to lift your house, how do you go? You're going to be into trouble straight away with that. You know, there's no way you're going to meet the current requirement where you're allowed to go 1.8 metres above the fence, and then at 45 degrees up from that in the plane, you're not supposed to intrude beyond that plane. That's going to be a big problem.
About what's going on in Queensland, they've relaxed all those rules because there's a recognition that that it was 8.5 metres for a height limit, but then the flood levels were just too high, so they went to 9.5. Now they're going to 10 and 12 and 12.5. I've heard as a relaxation for those areas. But you imagine, like, I've seen those homes. Like, it's ridiculous, and I've got some images of. In 2012, we did a house in Graceville, and we raised it 4 or 5 metres out of the ground, and then 18 months later, we built. 18 months later, council raised the level by another 1.5 metres during that time, flood level. So the neighbours went even higher, and Grandma still lives on the ground floor because she can't walk upstairs, and which isn't too bad, I suppose, if you don't really like her. But you know, it's like I just don't get it. Like, these houses just, I mean, people who have money have been putting lifts in flood zones, and still forgetting to put the actual electrics up. So we've literally had people in the recent events stuck in homes, can't get out because they've got mobility issues and their lift has stopped working. So then all of a sudden somebody's got to go and get them. And yeah, it's a difficult issue, and I think long term, like the other thing we were talking about earlier was, I get that if you've flooded badly, say you've got a 2-storey house and the floodwaters have gone 3 or 4 metres over your roof, multiple times, let's say, I get that you might not want to move because maybe you're okay with that, but what about your responsibility to future owners of that property? And are you okay with sort of the idea of selling that on to others in the future? Like, we've worked in areas where during COVID, for instance, because BCC was great, they actually expanded the program to keep us all working during COVID. So I actually employed more people, thankfully, and we were working in properties where people had moved in from Sydney and Melbourne, didn't even know they were in a flood zone, and actually flooded 3 days later. Like the real estate. So we're putting some rules in place now with the government, legislating that real estate agents have to actually tell people. But the whole idea of buyback and retreat, from my point of view, is about future generations. And so why I'm okay with people choosing now, because that's their life and that's their home, and fine, stay there if you want. But don't restrict somebody, don't tie somebody else into that problem later down the track. But that's where our planning scheme needs to come in, I think, and say, right, you might want to be here for 30 more years, but in 30 years, when you keel over and you're out of here, we're going to buy your property back. So we got first right of refusal. So in terms of what we're doing in the state and Queensland, we're looking at those sorts of things as well, caveats on properties. So we don't affect people's lives now, but first right of purchase at some point in the future when that property goes on the market. There's been people in Rocklea buying up properties, flood zone properties, right now for $400,000 that were they were worth about $700,000 pre-floods. And they know that within 12 months that value will increase again because we've got a housing crisis. And so it's those properties shouldn't really be there. There's what we call an outcomes report, and that goes on as a permanent record on the title of that property that this property's had resilience works done. So that way any future owner will know if that homeowner has ripped that stuff out at some point to put a new kitchen in or something like that and done the dodge. So yeah, we've tried to think about all sides to it. It's been really interesting, actually, working with some really good people. There's actually a lot of smart people out there that know their way and how to wade through bureaucracy to get stuff happening. I've been pleasantly surprised. You don't sort of think that that's the case a lot of the time because we're just down here in the whatever, but yeah, it's been good. They're smart.
Well, just interestingly touching on some of the stuff that we're doing at the property assessments is helping to overlay, I guess, where the concentration of the damage has been around here in the northern rivers, and then overlaying sort of floor height data that we're finding out in the inspections that we're undertaking, overlaying that with 1 to 100 flood levels, then also the flood levels from the recent floods, and starting to understand, okay, what areas or what pockets of what communities would be able to be lifted, and how high would it be lifted, and what's the extent of that. So that's certainly some stuff, certainly not as advanced as what's happening in Queensland, but some of the information that we're trying to garner out there right now with the investigations we're doing is to help inform the state government around potentially some of these options that they're going to take into the future.
Just to clarify, if someone comes up to me and says, like, need to rebuild the house, can I say with certainty they should use marine ply, or do I have to tell them they should use Talex or something like that? So a couple of materials, I can say with confidence, use a hardwood floor, use hardwood framing if you can afford it, use marine ply or some other material.
The way that we do it is I'm just honest with people and say, look, can't guarantee it's going to work perfectly, but it'll be a hell of a lot better than what you've currently got. So I would never say to somebody, oh, it's 100% full-time guarantee. Like, it's just, I think it's better to just say it's better than what you got, and who knows? Because I don't want to be kind of caught in, oh, it's definitely going to work. Like, I don't know the context, I don't know the situation, I don't know the flood levels, I don't know how long the inundation is, I don't know if it's so.
Just so, for example,
I wouldn't be pushing marine ply for every answer, for every solution, for every single thing. That's for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when have you seen it working?
Oh, we've seen it working in most of the work we've done. It's just we've also seen having some issues with it, that's all. And that was all about, the best case scenario is to 2-pack marine ply. But if you're using it for wall linings, it's hard to do. So, but if you're going to use it for wall linings, you've got to seal the back of it, all the sides of it, every single edge to it, multiple times. And then you can put it on. Like, that's definitely the way to go. Protect all edges.
And the flooring, just hardwood flooring, no insulation under it. Like, what sort of?
Is that a slab on ground or is that on a timber frame?
No, sorry, platform floor. So.
Oh yeah. What we've done there is there is a waterproof yellow tongue product. I can't remember the name of it. So we'll do that, and then we'll do the hardwood flooring on top of that. That's typically how we'll do it.
Right. Yeah, that's around here. I've seen a lot of that get a lot of water stuck in that cavity. That's one of the reasons why the insurers have been ripping up tile floors and that kind of thing, because that gap between, you've got your tongue groove and then you've got your yellow tongue, and then in between you've got obviously got an air cavity, and after inundation that holds the water.
When you say an air cavity, where would that be?
It's just a small cavity between, well, basically, firstly your tongue grooves have got the anti-cut marks underneath, so they've got the little curves, you know, that you're aware of. And you nail them and glue them. But there's still plenty of little air pockets under there, and they all get full of water. And what I've seen, and I'm not sure if you've seen the same thing, is that those floors just then really, the moisture levels stay up really high. And,
well, I think that's probably because the yellow tongue's actually not waterproof, potentially. So it's soaking up a lot of the water. So there is the yellow tongue we use is well, it's not yellow. Well, it's got a yellow tongue, but it's more of a CFC product. Yeah. And so yeah, I haven't seen any. No, we haven't had any issues with any of that stuff. I've also seen a lot of insurers not pulling out plasterboard as well. So when you say they pull stuff out, that doesn't necessarily mean all of them do the right thing. So we use for example, tiles are a good one, right? Tiles always come up. The good insurers will pull out a sand cementitious grout because it apparently soaks in the nasties. The bad ones will just leave it. So you'll hear this, oh, they pull it all out. Oh. We use a semi-epoxy cementitious grout, so they won't pull that out generally because it's a bit more expensive again from a cost point of view, but it's not an epoxy. So it's sort of halfway in between. You guys, if there's any tilers out there, you'd know what I'm talking about. It's a product that we've been using for a long time. It's not as hard to work with as an epoxy grout, which is expensive and difficult, but it does go down easy, and the insurers won't pull it out because it doesn't soak up the nasties like the other one does.
I'm getting a general gist of like, there are builders, there are tradies, there are homeowners, and the homeowners the insurers tell the homeowners that's what's going to happen, and the tradies are kind of trapped by the code, and there's this kind of theme I hear you talking about changing the code and relaxing the rules and the sort of higher ups, the Australian standards and the government. Is there any point of connection that you can imagine between the many people who are affected by the floods and saying, look, this is a standard, doesn't work for us in terms of a flood, a flood zone, a flooding area? Is there any point of connection where people like this could actually say, we need the rules changed? Hello, we're down here. Can you hear us?
I reckon you just tell everybody that you talk to and get on radio and talk to your local members and then just start misbehaving.
What we're saying, and I think that the parts of the government are saying, is people like yourselves, a lot of this is common sense. People have been through it time and time again. You're educated, you understand that. And I think there is an understanding now, I guess, of some of the social media platforms and things like that, and these types of information get back to government in various ways, which we've been finding out, is that they are aware that the general public seem to be a little bit more clued on into building back better in these resilient materials. So I think it's getting through from what we're seeing, and part of what we're trying to help design is some of these smarts that you've been doing for the last decade and start to try and fast track it.
Look, we were fortunate enough to be invited to some high-level meetings, and including with the New South Wales Minister for Flood Recovery. And I was really humbled by an attitude she brought in the room, which was, she was very honest. She said, look guys, I'm going to be completely fair with you. This is a burden for me because we can't fail. The scale of the disaster is such we cannot fail, so I'm here to listen. And she did. She really listened. And her and others whom I met constantly came with this attitude. They're kind of borderline overwhelmed at the extent of work that is needed and are really keen to listen. So I'm pretty confident that, if we are able to put something solid together, they will take it on board.
Just on, I can't help but think that, what we're facing with climate change is almost like we're in a bit of a war zone. And I always sort of think about the parallels with the Ukraine. Like we've literally got internal refugees right now that are because of climate, and So the first thing you do, I think, is defend your property, and I think, well, eventually things will kind of change, and so, it's happening. The fact that I'm even here, before this last recent event, I was just that guy that, was buzzing around and trying to do stuff, and but I definitely think that people like the Johns Lyng Group, if you think about an army of workers, thousands of tradies that just literally refuse to do shit work and say, no, we're no longer going to go that way with our tanks. We're going to go this way because we want to build back better, and we don't. The powers that be will listen because it's common sense, as Daniel said. And so I think if we all get together and just keep talking and having these sorts of events, and I know Four Corners are doing a story on this at some point soon, and the 7:30 report, and it'll start just becoming more and more. There'll be a lot more awareness, and hopefully, it just carries on through. So.